When World War II ended in 1945, the United States faced a challenge unlike anything in its history. More than 16 million Americans had served in uniform. They were coming home at once, returning to a nation that had to absorb them into civilian life without triggering economic collapse, mass unemployment, or social unrest. The memory of the post-World War I period loomed large. After 1918, millions of veterans returned to a stagnant economy, found little support, and faced decades of financial instability. Policymakers in 1944 understood that repeating this mistake could destabilize the nation. The GI Bill, officially, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, was designed to prevent that outcome. What emerged was one of the most transformative laws in American history. The fundamental idea behind the GI Bill was simple. Instead of viewing returning veterans as a burden, the United States would treat them as an investment. The law created a comprehensive system of benefits that offered education, housing assistance, unemployment support, and opportunities for business creation. For the first time in American history, millions of working-class men, many of whom had never considered college or homeownership possible, were given access to the building blocks of economic mobility. This shift was not merely social policy. It was a strategic effort to convert wartime mobilization into long-term national strength. Education benefits formed the core of the GI Bill. Before the war, college attendance in the United States was limited to a small segment of the population. Higher education was expensive, inaccessible, and largely reserved for the upper and middle classes. The GI Bill changed this dynamic overnight. Veterans received tuition coverage, books, and a living allowance. Universities that once served elite communities suddenly faced an influx of hundreds of thousands of new students from working-class backgrounds. For many institutions, this wave of veterans prevented financial collapse after years of wartime austerity. For veterans, education became a path to stable careers in engineering, science, medicine, law, and business. The United States gained an unprecedented reservoir of trained professionals, which fueled growth in every major sector. While the education benefit reshaped the intellectual landscape, the housing provision reshaped the physical landscape. The GI Bill guaranteed low-interest loans for veterans, enabling millions to purchase homes with minimal down payments. Homeownership, once a privilege, became a cornerstone of American life. Developers began building large suburban communities to accommodate demand. Neighborhoods that did not exist before the war became hubs of American family life in the 1950s. These developments stimulated the construction industry, increased demand for household goods, and created jobs across the country. The rise of suburbia expanded the middle class and altered the geography of American society. Another component of the GI Bill offered unemployment insurance for returning veterans. This measure ensured that those who struggled to find immediate work would receive temporary financial stability. Unlike the post-World War I demobilization, which left veterans competing for jobs in a bleak economy, the GI Bill provided a safety net that prevented sudden surges in joblessness. This not only protected individuals, but also stabilized the broader economy. Veterans could search for work that matched their skills or pursue training programs without falling into poverty. Small business loans represented another important pillar of the GI Bill. Many veterans used these loans to open shops, repair services, manufacturing firms, and other local enterprises. These businesses anchored communities and contributed to economic growth. Because the GI Bill reduced financial risk, it allowed veterans to experiment with entrepreneurship, driving innovation in the early post-war period. The combined effect of homeownership, education, and business creation laid the foundation for one of the most dynamic economic expansions in U.S. history. The GI Bill also reshaped the American workforce. Veterans who entered universities gained access to technical knowledge that had been unavailable to their parents' generation. Many became engineers, scientists, and administrators who would later play key roles in defense industries, research laboratories, and corporate management. This influx of educated workers strengthened American industrial capacity and provided the expertise required for emerging fields such as aviation, nuclear technology, computing, and electronics. In this way, the GI Bill did not merely benefit individuals. It elevated the technological and administrative capability of the entire nation. The social impact of the bill extended beyond economics. The experience of serving in a massive, integrated wartime society encouraged veterans to seek stability, community, and long-term security. The GI Bill's benefits supported the creation of stable households, increased rates of marriage, and contributed to the post-war population surge known as the baby boom. Families settled in new suburban neighborhoods, creating communities defined by shared experiences of war and peace. The result was a society more cohesive, more stable, and more optimistic about the future. However, the success of the GI Bill was not automatic. It required vast administrative coordination between federal agencies, universities, banks, and state governments. The Veterans Administration had to process millions of claims, supervise training programs, and monitor academic institutions. Universities had to adapt rapidly to unprecedented enrollment. Banks had to adjust lending practices to accommodate government-backed loans. These logistical adjustments were enormous, yet the system functioned effectively. The result was a level of social mobility unmatched in any previous era of American history. By the end of millions of veterans had already applied for benefits, and the long-term effects of the GI Bill were becoming visible. The United States had avoided a post-war economic depression and instead entered a period of sustained growth. The policy did not simply reintegrate veterans, it transformed them into the backbone of a new era. The next phases of this transformation would unfold across education, industry, and homeownership, reshaping not only the economy but the identity of the nation itself. As the GI Bill entered full implementation in the late 1940s, its influence became even more visible across American institutions. Universities expanded programs, built new facilities, and hired faculty to meet the surge in demand. Entire disciplines grew rapidly as veterans pursued degrees in engineering, medicine, chemistry, mathematics, law, and education. The United States suddenly possessed a large, skilled workforce prepared to meet the challenges of a rapidly modernizing world. Many of the advancements in post-war industry, technology, and science would have been impossible without the educational foundation created by the GI Bill. One of the most transformative aspects of the GI Bill was the diversification of higher education. Before the war, most universities catered to young adults from wealthier backgrounds. The arrival of millions of veterans broke this pattern entirely. Students were older, more disciplined, and more focused on achieving stable careers. Their presence changed classroom culture and academic expectations. Professors noted that veterans asked sharper questions, studied more diligently, and approached coursework with the urgency of individuals building a future for themselves and their families. Universities evolved from elite institutions into engines of national development. The enrollment boom also reshaped the physical campuses of colleges nationwide. Temporary classrooms were built, barrack-style housing appeared on university grounds, and existing facilities were expanded. Federal funding and tuition payments flowed directly into universities, strengthening their finances and allowing long-term investment in research and academic programs. Many of the scientific breakthroughs of the 1950s and 1960s, from early computing to nuclear energy, were made possible because of the academic infrastructure strengthened by the GI Bill. Beyond universities, the GI Bill transformed American housing. The government guaranteed loans allowed veterans to purchase homes with low interest rates and minimal down payments. Banks embraced the program, confident in the federal guarantees. As a result, homeownership rates soared. The rise of suburban neighborhoods became one of the most defining features of post-war America. Builders developed mass-produced housing using standardized designs, reducing construction costs and enabling entire families to move into new communities almost overnight. These suburbs quickly developed their own schools, parks, churches, and shopping centers. This suburban expansion stimulated economic growth across multiple industries. Construction companies hired thousands of workers. Lumber mills, concrete factories, appliance manufacturers, and furniture companies saw sudden increases in demand. The economies of entire states were boosted by the rising tide of home building. As families settled into their new homes, consumer spending increased, supporting local businesses and fueling a cycle of economic expansion. The GI Bill's support for small businesses also created long-lasting economic effects. Veterans opened repair shops, restaurants, manufacturing firms, and service companies in growing towns and expanding suburbs. These small businesses became the economic backbone of local communities. Federal loan guarantees reduced financial risk, encouraging entrepreneurship on a scale previously unseen in the United States. This entrepreneurial surge contributed to the diversification of the American economy and increased local employment opportunities. The GI Bill also changed workforce demographics. In the 1930s, a large portion of the workforce lacked formal training. By the mid-1950s, millions of workers possessed college degrees, technical certifications, or specialized vocational training funded by the GI Bill. This infusion of skilled labor elevated entire industries. Aviation, electronics, chemicals, automotive manufacturing, and emerging computer technologies all benefited from the growing pool of trained workers. This shift had geopolitical implications. The Cold War, emerging immediately after World War II, demanded a highly educated population capable of sustaining scientific research, advanced engineering, and industrial production. The GI Bill provided exactly this foundation. American scientists trained under GI Bill programs later contributed to space exploration, missile technology, nuclear research, and advanced computing. These fields became central to national defense and global competition. Without the GI Bill's educational impact, the United States would have faced the early Cold War with a smaller and less prepared technological base. Economic stability remained one of the strongest outcomes of the GI Bill. Veterans entering the workforce with higher skills and education faced lower unemployment rates, higher earning potential, and greater job mobility. The American middle class expanded dramatically, marking one of the largest increases in wealth and economic security in modern history. This stability reduced the likelihood of political unrest and supported the growth of democratic institutions. Families with stable incomes purchased homes, cars, and household goods, stimulating consumer-driven demand that sustained national economic growth for decades. The social structure of the United States also shifted. The GI Bill encouraged veterans to pursue long-term careers, invest in their families, and engage in community life. Suburban neighborhoods fostered connections between families who had shared wartime experiences, creating communities rooted in stability and mutual support. Schools expanded to accommodate the rising number of children born during the baby boom. These educational institutions later produced another generation of skilled professionals who benefited indirectly from the post-war prosperity the GI Bill helped generate. Yet, the GI Bill's successes were not universal. While millions benefited from its provisions, access was uneven in some regions. Discriminatory practices, particularly in certain housing markets and local education systems, limited opportunities for minority veterans. Federal policy itself was inclusive on paper, but implementation often reflected local inequalities. Despite these challenges, the GI Bill's overall national impact remained transformative. It established a framework for expanding access to education, stabilizing families, and supporting upward mobility, even if its benefits were not evenly distributed. Politically, the success of the GI Bill strengthened faith in federal programs and demonstrated that government intervention, when executed effectively, could generate substantial long-term benefits. The program became a model for future policy initiatives related to education, housing, and workforce development. In many ways, the GI Bill redefined the relationship between citizens and the state by demonstrating that large-scale public investment in individuals could produce immense national returns. By the early 1950s, it was clear that the GI Bill had become a central pillar of American life. The country had avoided the economic collapse many feared after demobilization. Instead, the United States experienced one of the greatest periods of sustained growth in its history, fueled by veterans who had been empowered to build better lives. The next stage of the story would further reveal how the GI Bill's influence extended into industry, global competition, and the emergence of the United States as a dominant world power. By the mid-1950s, the full economic power of the GI Bill had become undeniable. What began as a reintegration program for returning soldiers had evolved into a structural engine shaping every major sector of American life. Education, industry, infrastructure, and consumer culture were expanding at rates unmatched in previous decades. The United States was no longer simply recovering from war, it was entering the largest economic boom in its history, powered by millions of veterans who had gained skills, stability, and homeownership through the GI Bill. One of the clearest signs of transformation appeared in the labor market. Veterans who completed college or vocational training under the GI Bill moved rapidly into skilled jobs. They became engineers, teachers, accountants, factory supervisors, electricians, pilots, and technicians. They filled newly created roles in the expanding sectors of manufacturing, defense, energy, transportation, and electronics. This infusion of skilled labor allowed companies to grow, innovate, and modernize. Factories that once relied on manual labor adopted more advanced production techniques. Supported by workers trained in mathematics, engineering, and industrial design, the GI Bill's influence extended into research and development. As universities expanded and research budgets increased, laboratories across the country became hubs of technological innovation. Many veterans pursued advanced degrees in physics, chemistry, biology, and engineering fields essential to the emerging technological rivalry of the Cold War. Their research contributed to breakthroughs in computing, aviation, nuclear energy, and materials science. In turn, these breakthroughs fed into military and civilian industries. The connection between higher education and national power became increasingly evident. Defense-related industries, in particular, drew heavily on the workforce produced by the GI Bill. The United States, facing growing strategic competition with the Soviet Union, invested in missile development, early computers, radar systems, advanced aircraft, and nuclear technology. These industries required deep pools of scientific and technical talent. Veterans educated through GI benefits formed a substantial portion of this workforce. Their training allowed the United States to develop systems that shaped the Cold War: intercontinental missiles, jet aircraft, nuclear submarines, and early guidance systems. The rise of the American middle class also reshaped consumer markets. Homeownership meant more than acquiring a place to live. It meant purchasing refrigerators, stoves, furniture, radios, automobiles, and eventually televisions. The GI Bill's housing loan system fueled demand across multiple industries. Manufacturing output increased. Advertising expanded. New suburban shopping centers emerged, replacing older urban retail patterns. Local economies grew as veterans invested in cars, home improvements, and appliances. Consumer credit systems developed rapidly, extending purchasing power to families who previously had limited financial access. Infrastructure development complemented this growth. Veterans, working in engineering, construction, and logistics, contributed to projects that reshaped the country's physical landscape. Roads expanded, electricity reached rural communities, and new urban centers emerged around industrial hubs. The growth of the interstate highway system in the late 1950s, although not a direct part of the GI Bill, was built by companies and workers whose skills were made possible through GI-funded education. These highways supported commerce, defense mobility, and suburban expansion, further amplifying the GI Bill's long-term impact. The GI Bill also influenced American corporate culture. Many veterans entered managerial and leadership positions, bringing with them organizational skills gained from military service and strengthened by university education. Their leadership styles emphasized planning, coordination, and efficiency. They helped modernize companies, adopt new technologies, and improve production systems. The professionalization of management in the 1950s and 1960s owed much to the generation shaped by the GI Bill. Another transformative effect emerged in the financial sector. As millions purchased homes through government-backed loans, the mortgage market expanded dramatically. Banks created new lending divisions, and mortgage-backed financing became a stable economic pillar. This financial stability encouraged further investment in housing and construction, reinforcing the cycle of economic growth. Meanwhile, small businesses created with GI Bill support contributed local tax revenue, diversified communities, and anchored economic development in towns across the country. The social fabric of the nation was shifting as well. The GI Bill created a society built around family stability, long-term employment, and home-centered community life. Suburbs became symbols of prosperity, with families gathering for neighborhood events, school activities, and civic organizations. Veterans often served as community leaders, volunteers, school board members, local politicians, strengthening democratic participation. Their shared wartime experience and educational advancement created a culture that valued civic responsibility and social cohesion. Yet, the GI Bill's influence was not without limitations. Many minority veterans faced barriers in accessing benefits due to discriminatory practices in housing markets and some educational institutions. In parts of the country, segregation prevented black veterans from buying homes in certain neighborhoods or enrolling in certain colleges. While the law was inclusive, implementation sometimes reflected existing inequalities. These disparities highlighted tensions in American society and would later contribute to the civil rights movement. Even so, the GI Bill's overall impact on national development remained profound. Economists studying the post-war period noted that the GI Bill functioned as one of the most successful government investments in U.S. history. The cost of providing education, housing, and training returned enormous dividends through higher tax revenue, sustained consumer spending, increased productivity, and reduced unemployment. Every dollar spent on GI Bill benefits produced multiple dollars in long-term economic output. This return on investment supported the argument that human capital, skills, education, and opportunity was among the most valuable assets a nation could develop by the end of the 1950s. The United States stood at a global peak of influence. Its economy was the largest in the world, its industries defined global standards, and its technological capabilities were advancing rapidly. Much of this success traced back to the expansion of human capital created by the GI Bill. The next phase of the story would show how these veterans carried their influence into industry, governance, science, and national strategy, shaping a superpower whose strength rested not only on military might, but on the capabilities of millions of educated citizens. As the 1960s approached, the generation shaped by the GI Bill had matured into a powerful force within American society. Veterans who once returned home with uncertainty were now leaders in business, science, engineering, education, and government. Their accumulated influence, amplified by millions of individual successes, propelled the United States into the front ranks of global power. This transformation was not a coincidence. It was the direct result of a nationwide elevation in skill, education, and economic stability. The GI Bill had functioned as a massive accelerator, converting wartime service into a foundation for long-term national strength. The scientific and technological fields offered some of the clearest examples of this impact. Veterans trained through GI-funded programs filled laboratories, research centers, and universities, advancing the frontiers of knowledge. As the Cold War intensified, the United States needed experts capable of designing satellites, understanding nuclear physics, developing advanced propulsion systems, and building early computers. The GI Bill provided the workforce to meet these needs. Veterans became key figures in aerospace companies such as Boeing, Lockheed, and North American Aviation, contributing to aircraft development, missile systems, In the early stages of space exploration. With the space race gaining momentum, the United States required thousands of engineers and scientists to compete with the Soviet Union. Many of these professionals were former servicemen whose education had been financed by GI benefits. Their expertise supported landmark achievements, including satellite launches, rocket design improvements, and the groundwork for the Apollo program. The GI Bill had helped create not just soldiers who returned home, it had produced the architects of America's technological ascent. The economic effects continued to expand in scale. Veterans who had purchased homes in the 1940s and 50s now built stable financial foundations for their families. These homes increased in value, contributing to wealth accumulation across the new middle class. Suburban growth encouraged the construction of highways, commercial centers, and industrial parks. Companies relocated or expanded into these areas, taking advantage of available land and access to a growing labor pool. The economic geography of the United States shifted away from older industrial cities to suburban and Sunbelt regions that benefited from post-war development patterns. Small businesses created by veterans matured into steady institutions within their communities. Some grew into significant regional or national companies. These enterprises employed successive generations of Americans and contributed to local economic stability. The GI Bill had sparked one of the largest waves of entrepreneurship in U.S. history, diversifying the economy and strengthening the private sector. Culturally, the GI Bill reshaped societal expectations. Prior to the war, higher education had been reserved for a minority. After the GI Bill, attending college became a common aspiration for middle-class families. Parents who had used GI benefits to attend college encouraged their children to do the same. This shift created a culture that valued education as a path to opportunity and security. College attendance rates rose throughout the 1960s and 70s, supported by federal financial programs modeled partly on the GI Bill. The idea that the government could expand educational access for national benefit became widely accepted. The GI Bill also influenced American politics. Veterans entered public office at local, state, and federal levels, bringing with them leadership skills acquired during the war and enhanced through education. Their policy decisions reflected the values of a generation that believed in stability, community, and economic opportunity. Many supported infrastructure development, education, funding, and technical innovation. The presence of highly educated veterans in government contributed to a political climate focused on modernization and competition in a global environment. The social stability created by the GI Bill contributed to the United States' growing role in global affairs. A strong economy, skilled workforce, and expanding technological base allowed the country to project influence through diplomacy, military capabilities, and industrial power. The United States could support allies, establish international institutions, and shape global economic systems in ways that would have been impossible without the post-war boom. The GI Bill had strengthened internal foundations, allowing the country to act decisively on the world stage. Yet, the GI Bill's legacy was not free of contradictions. While it elevated millions, some groups remained marginalized due to discriminatory practices in housing markets, college admissions, and local loan administration. Black veterans in particular faced barriers in accessing home loans and educational opportunities in segregated regions. These inequalities helped expose the contradictions between American ideals and American reality, fueling the civil rights movement. Many civil rights leaders argued that the promise of the GI Bill should apply equally to all veterans and citizens, not just to those allowed by local institutions to participate fully. Despite these inequalities, the GI Bill's overall effect on national development remained unprecedented. It had created the most educated workforce in the world, powered technological advancement, and supported a prosperous middle class. The law demonstrated the potential of federal policy to reshape society. When applied on a national scale and supported by long-term investment, the transformation of veterans into scientists, engineers, teachers, and entrepreneurs showed that national strength could be built through opportunity rather than exploitation. By the time the United States entered the 1970s, the generation empowered by the GI Bill had reshaped every major sector of American life, from laboratories to boardrooms, classrooms to city halls. Their influence was unmistakable. The nation's rise to superpower status was grounded not only in military victory but in the domestic strength created by millions of educated, stable, and economically secure citizens. The final phase of this story would reveal how the GI Bill's legacy extended far beyond the immediate post-war years, shaping American society for decades and providing a model for future investments in national human capital. By the late 20th century, the long-term legacy of the GI Bill had become clear. It was no longer just a policy associated with World War II. Its impact had become embedded in the structure of American society. Generations of veterans had used its benefits to earn degrees, purchase homes, open businesses, and build stable families. Their children and grandchildren inherited the security and expectations created by this transformation. The GI Bill did not simply elevate individual lives. It reshaped the nation's culture, economy, and identity. It became a blueprint for how a country could turn a mass wartime mobilization into lasting national power. One of the clearest indicators of this legacy was the extraordinary expansion of higher education. Colleges that once served small elite populations evolved into major public institutions. State university systems expanded dramatically, building campuses, laboratories, and professional programs that would define American education for decades. Many of the scientists who built the modern medical, technological, and engineering landscape were educated through the GI Bill. Their innovations from pharmaceuticals to computing became pillars of the global economy. Homeownership, another pillar of the GI Bill, created intergenerational wealth. Veterans who purchased homes in the 1940s and 1950s often saw their property values increase significantly over time. These homes became financial assets used to support education, retirement, and family stability. The rise of the American suburb became a defining feature of national life. Streets, parks, schools, and community centers grew around these neighborhoods, creating environments where families could prosper. This suburban expansion also encouraged the growth of automotive, construction, and retail industries that would become major economic drivers. In the business world, companies created or expanded by veterans contributed to economic diversity and resilience. These businesses ranged from small local shops to large manufacturing firms. Over time, many of them became anchors of local economies, offering employment and fostering community stability. The entrepreneurial wave driven by the GI Bill introduced new ideas, products, and services across the country. By encouraging risk-taking and innovation, the bill indirectly boosted American competitiveness on a global scale. The GI Bill also influenced patterns of social mobility. Before World War II, the path to a secure middle-class life was narrow and uncertain. After the GI Bill, education and homeownership became realistic goals for millions, helping them rise from working-class backgrounds into stable, prosperous positions. This shift reduced class barriers and encouraged a culture built on aspiration and achievement. The idea that ordinary citizens could advance through education and hard work became a central component of the American identity. Politically, the GI Bill helped stabilize the United States during moments of intense global tension. The Cold War demanded not only military power but also economic strength and technological innovation. The GI Bill produced the talent and stability needed to meet these challenges. Former servicemen became leaders in government, science, diplomacy, and industry. They brought with them the discipline and experience of wartime service combined with the educational foundation provided by the bill. Their leadership contributed to the development of institutions that would guide the United States through decades of geopolitical competition. The GI Bill also became a template for future governmental programs. Later legislation for Vietnam War veterans, educational grants, and workforce development initiatives drew inspiration from its structure. Policymakers recognized that investment in human capital could yield long-term national strength. The bill's success demonstrated that proactive support for citizens could generate profound social and economic benefits. It showed that government policy, if carefully designed, could create opportunity rather than dependency. Culturally, the GI Bill contributed to a sense of national unity. Veterans who had served side by side in wartime now built communities together in peacetime. The neighborhoods they formed, the schools they supported, and the institutions they strengthened all contributed to a shared national experience. This cohesion helped stabilize the country during periods of social and political change. It fostered civic engagement, volunteerism, and participation in local government. However, the GI Bill's legacy also highlighted areas where American society fell short of its ideals. The exclusion of many minority veterans due to discriminatory local practices exposed structural inequalities that would take decades to confront. The civil rights movement, in part, emerged from the contradiction between the GI Bill's promise and its uneven implementation. This tension served as a reminder that national progress required constant attention to fairness and inclusion. Later reforms aimed to address these disparities, expanding access to benefits and opportunities for more Americans. By the end of the 20th century, economists, historians, and policymakers widely regarded the GI Bill as one of the most successful pieces of social legislation in U.S. history. It reshaped the workforce, expanded the middle class, accelerated technological progress, and created a foundation for sustained national prosperity. Its return on investment was extraordinary. Veterans who received benefits earned higher incomes, paid more taxes, and contributed to economic growth in ways that far exceeded the program's initial cost. The GI Bill had turned millions of individuals into contributors to a national project, one that elevated the United States to global leadership. It demonstrated that a nation's greatest asset is its people, and that empowering citizens can generate a level of strength unmatched by raw industrial production or military hardware alone. The veterans who used the GI Bill to build careers, families, businesses, and communities collectively transformed the United States into a superpower built not only on military victory, but on education, opportunity, and economic mobility. In the final measure, the GI Bill stands as a testament to the idea that national power can emerge from deliberate investment in human potential. It remains one of the clearest examples in history of how a democracy can convert wartime sacrifice into long-lasting strength. The law did more than support returning soldiers. It reshaped a nation, expanded its horizons, and laid the groundwork for an era of global leadership. Its legacy endures in the prosperity, stability, and innovation that continue to define the United States.